Okay, we'll get started then. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this live changes Q&A today on the GRESB 2020 Infrastructure Assessments. My name is Rick Walters. I'm the Director of Infrastructure at GRESB. It's certainly a strange time and it's really unfortunate we have to cancel our in-person trainings, but we're really glad we can interact with so many of you today via this webinar. The changes Q&A session is focused on recurring GRESB participants. We'll assume that you've participated in GRESB in past years and undertaken at least one of the online changes training sessions. We held separate Q&A sessions for new participants last week. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be made available online for use by others who couldn't make it today. Almost the entire infrastructure team is dialing in today, and I'd like to introduce you to them in a moment. Everyone's working from home in Amsterdam, and we agreed not to switch on our cameras to ensure good sound quality, and in my case, no unintended guest appearances from my pupils. Those of you who are homeschooling will know what I mean. You'll hear from a number of different people today during today's webinars, so it's always nice to put a face to the name. So let's start with some introductions. As I said, my name is Rick Walters. I'm Director of Infrastructure. Been with GRESB now for 2.5 years. I'm an engineer by background with more than 25 years experience in infrastructure right across the life cycle. I'm very proud to lead the dedicated and hardworking infrastructure team at GRESB, and I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Katie.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Katie. I joined GRESB in September last year as an associate. Previously, I've worked in sustainability consulting and as a sustainability advisor in a large Dutch construction company. Since I've been at GRESB, I've worked on the asset performance component, and I'm also involved in some of our governance groups, such as the Infrastructure Benchmark Committee and our working group on developments.
Thanks, Katie. Aurelian.
Morning, everyone. So my name is Aurelian Reynolds. I'm an analyst at GRESB and I've been at GRESB for 2 years. My areas of expertise within GRESB include the GRESB materiality assessment and SDG mapping. I have also been involved in the updates of the 2020 GRESB resilience module with our new climate change specialist, Eric Landry. Eric, on to you.
Thanks, everyone. This is Eric, and as Aurelian mentioned, I'm GRESB's climate change specialist. I joined GRESB 2 months ago now, and I'm responsible for its climate-related risk and resilience projects, partnerships, and strategy. Before GRESB, I was at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, leading a working group on climate-related scenarios to provide guidance to industry and investors on the appropriate use of climate scenarios, particularly in the context of climate-related financial disclosures. Thanks. Back to you, Rick.
Thanks, guys. And our colleagues, David Tassido and Lisa Tassis, are not on the call today, but have been involved in various other calls, just so you know who they are as well. So you now know who's on the receiving end of the questions that you might send to GRESB via our contact form. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you need support. We're here to help, especially during this very unusual period for all of us. Hopefully you'll hear from everyone today in answering your questions. We also have regional representatives, and some of you may know Ruben Langbroek, who is on the call today. Ruben, would you like to make a short introduction?
Sure, thank you. So my name is Ruben Langbroek, and I oversee Asia Pacific for GRESB. Currently, I do this from the four walls of my home, but hopefully when the situation reverts back to normal, I'm able to visit you all again in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. And you can see our other regional staff there as well. We'd like to recognise our partners supporting us today. So for today, GHD is our partner. They were going to support our in-person event in Sydney, but obviously with the change to all online, it's great that they can be showing their support via this webinar. Next, we'll just talk you through Zoom and how we're going to use it today. Hopefully many of you are familiar with the format, given we're probably all getting used to this. I hope you've all been able to join the session with your computer. You'll definitely get the best experience with that rather than just a dial-in. There are features that aren't available on the dial-in. We're going to start with questions that were submitted to us ahead of the Q&A, and then we'll be taking other questions from the Q&A session today. To ask questions today, you've got 2 modes you can use. The first is using the Q&A feature down at the bottom. So click on that and you can type your questions. Please don't use the chat feature. We won't be using that for questions today. We'll sort through the questions and then direct them to the right person and seek to answer them. If you, on the other hand, prefer to ask a question verbally, please click on the raise hand button at the bottom. That will let us know that you wish to ask a question verbally. We'll then point you out, unmute you, and give you a chance to ask your question, and then we can answer it. So they're the features we should be using today. The agenda for today is on the next slide. And basically the purpose really is to be spending the time answering your questions. That's where the bulk of the time will be. We'll give a short introduction, which we're doing now. Before going much further though, we do have a short online poll that we'll run with you just to get a sense of who's on the call today. So we'll pop that up in a moment. Please look through the poll, scroll down through the questions, answer them all, and when you're finished, hit the submit button. While you're doing that, I'll just explain a little bit about GRESB's response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Next slide. During this unprecedented outbreak and crisis, we understand that the top priority for asset operators, managers, and our whole industry is to keep employees, customers, and our communities safe and to ensure our infrastructure continues to support society. We're also aware that our investor members are dealing with a challenging financial market. So in response to this, member feedback and guidance from our governance bodies, we've decided to extend both the GRESB real estate and infrastructure assessment submission deadlines by 1 month to August the 1st this year. The new deadline will have an impact on the timing of response checks, the validation process, the review period, the launch of the results, and distribution of benchmark reports. We've updated our 2020 assessment timeline accordingly, and we'll continue to keep the situation under close review. It's important we stay connected throughout the reporting period. That's why we'll schedule additional meetings with our global advisory boards and benchmark committees. Keep appraised of developments in different regions and sectors. We also published a feedback form on our website to help us understand the impact COVID-19 is having on you and to explore actions being taken to manage the crisis. We really encourage you to complete this feedback form to provide us with your valuable feedback. So just go to our website and complete that. We'd like to thank you for your ongoing commitment to sustainability, transparency, and reporting. We opened our portal on April the 1st as planned, and the GRESB team is dedicated to working with you through these challenging times. These times do underline just how interconnected and interdependent we all are, and we're really open to any suggestions you may have for actions GRESB can take to support the industry. All right, we'll close the poll now, and we'll take a little look at the results. So we can see that yeah, by far, almost all of you have logged into the GRESB assessment portal, which is great. In terms of the infrastructure lessons you've completed, a third of you have not got into it yet, but certainly plan to. We've got, I think it's one each of you have done the fund and the asset assessment changes, which is good, and then some other lessons, another third of you. In terms of experience with GRESB, we have got about a third of first timers on the call, another third where it's your first time, but not the first time for your company, and another third where it's the second year. So probably a little less experienced than the call yesterday for the other time zone. We'll try and cater for that in the questions. 100% of you are working from home, perhaps not surprising, seems to be what everyone's doing these days. And managing the work-life balance, half of you is trying to stay positive, and then we've got a mixture of other responses. All right, it's tough, looking forward to going back to the office and having small children, which presents its additional challenges. So thanks very much for that. That gives us a bit of picture of who you are and the type of questions you might ask and need answered. We'll try to make sure we cater for that in the session. Just a reminder that the session today is being recorded as well. So let's have a bit of a look before we get into your questions at the assessment timeline. As I said before, we opened the portal on April the 1st as usual, and you have until 1st of August to submit your assessments. Response checks can be booked from portal opening right up until the 1st of July, subject to availability. For those who don't know, response checks are an additional paid service featuring a careful review of your assessment response, followed by a 1-hour discussion call. After the discussion call, you'll receive a feedback report highlighting any issues found. This is intended to ensure you've not overlooked important details in your submission, provides an opportunity for you to ask it for additional guidance, clarification on certain indicators. You don't need to have completed your assessment to book a response check, but you do need to complete it when it comes to approaching the time for your actual call. So they can be booked from any time now. Here's the process to request a response check on the screen. I'll let you have a look at that. Pretty straightforward, and it may be something that particularly some of you newer ones may wish to take up. Going back to the timeline, we have opened our online training, and it's great that many of you have started to use that. We certainly encourage you to utilize that. If you're a repeat participant, like many of you on the call, the changes lessons are the ones to focus on, and then the other lessons you may just wish to have a look at if you want to refresh your knowledge. If you're a fairly new participant, then going through a lot of the main lessons is quite useful. Pick out which ones you think will be most useful for you. They're not too long, so as a package, they could be a great way to start. I would say that there's nothing in the training that's not already in the reference guides, but we know that some people have different learning styles, and the training does suit some people particularly well. They're comprehensive and designed to equip newcomers to undertake the GRESB assessments confidently. Following the portal close, then validation is undertaken, then scoring, after which we release our preliminary results to participants only on the 1st of October. Then there's a 2-week review period during which participants may request a validation or scoring review. After that, we finalize the results and launch them to you and our public anonymized aggregated results on the 1st of November. All right, hopefully that's given you a good picture of the timeline for this year with those slight changes to previous years. Let's have a look and get stuck into the Q&A. Please bring your questions forward. We will structure it in a bit of an order, but we can be a little bit flexible with that as well. So we're going to start with the infrastructure asset assessment and its entity and reporting characteristics. So let's have a look and see whether we get any questions on that. We do have a question which came in advance, so I'll have a go at that one first. The question is, what constitutes an asset entity when an investable asset is comprised of multiple facilities? For example, 175 preschools and 10 care homes across 3 Scandinavian countries. So completing multiple assessments allows comparisons between assets, and we strongly encourage that. Whilst a single assessment may take less time if the relevant data is more readily available at the aggregated level. So it is ultimately up to the participant, but if the participant elects to report on multiple facilities in one assessment, so doing that aggregation, it's strongly recommended that you don't aggregate any further than beyond a single sector and country combination. Otherwise, peer group comparisons are likely to be far less specific and useful. So having a look at this example, you could do each of the entities completely separately. Each of the 175 preschools and 10 care homes do one each asset assessment. If you wanted to aggregate though, then we wouldn't recommend aggregating beyond, say, for example, 30 preschools in Sweden or 5 care homes in Sweden or something like that. For example, we wouldn't recommend doing, say, 20 preschools in Sweden and 10 in Norway as one aggregate because it starts to move you up into a less useful peer group. Similarly, we wouldn't recommend doing 20 preschools in Sweden and 5 care homes in Sweden together because it won't be in one defined sector. So hopefully that answers that question. I can see a few other questions coming in, so we'll get to them in a moment. We did have one other question also on the same entity and reporting characteristics for assets. It is regard to the size of the asset indicator, RC2. What does contractor mean in this context? Does it mean the number of temporary workers or the number of companies which work for us at our sites? So the answer is it means contractor workers. That is, workers on the asset sites that are not employees of the asset entity. Instead, they work for a separate company that is engaged under a contract. Hopefully that makes it clear. So we're not talking about, say, contract employees who are temporary, if you like, and we're not talking about the number of contractor companies. It's the contractor workers. All right, let's have a bit of a look at questions coming in and also see whether anyone has raised their hand. We haven't got any raised hands, which is fine. Okay, there's a question about asking questions through the GRESB portal and them not having been responded to. I'll give a quick answer. There should be no delays there. There's certainly no problems with our portal. So maybe we can talk to you separately about that and see if there's some information missing or something like that. There should be no reason why there's no response. I guess the other thing is to make sure, just to remind to everybody, the best way to send questions through is from our contact form on our website. And so that will make sure that everything goes through our customer support system called Freshdesk, and that way it can't be missed or anything like that. So I don't know whether that was done, but just to make sure that system is used. There's another question on the implementation section of the asset assessment. The implementation section is no longer scored and you cannot load evidence. This was worth 9.9 marks. Why is this not scored? Okay, good question. This was definitely a change from last year. So I'll just describe briefly the overall changes process that we go through first, to give that background. The whole assessment goes through a review with our governance groups. To do that, we first look at all the results from the previous year. So how participants have performed. We look at trends in the industry. We look at feedback we've received. And then we also look at our strategic plan of where we're going over the next few years. We combine all that together and make recommendations about changes, and we discuss those with our governance groups. And then we, subject to the feedback from our governance groups, we implement those changes. Okay, in this case with this one, in our analysis of previous year's results with the implementation indicators, we found that there was quite kind of mixed responses to these, and they're very hard to validate. So as you can imagine, this is getting information about actions taken by assets to improve or manage their ESG performance, and the responses can be quite variable, very hard to validate and very hard to score. If someone is doing a whole bunch of things, listing off many actions they're taking, is that better than somebody else who's got one or two but does them really well? All of that is very subjective and very hard to validate and score. So we discussed that with our governance groups, and with their input, we made the decision to keep these indicators but not score them any longer. So allow them for reporting purposes. They're good. They're a good way to engage between assets and their owners, but we felt that they don't add a lot of value from a scoring perspective. They're too subjective. So that's why we made that change. There was quite a lot of interest in removing them all together, but on balance, there was enough interest as well in keeping them so that people can report the positive things that they're doing to address ESG. Okay. Another question, what format will the scoring review take, please? So I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by the scoring. I think you mean the review process. So I'll assume that is the question. There is a bit more detailed information on that on our website on the review process, and I think that's linked to the timeline also. So I'll just go and open that so that I've got that in front of me. And while I'm just bringing up an answer for that, we do have another question which might get Aurelian to have a response to while I find the necessary information for the previous one. So this question is, with the need to have a third party check, validate and assess formally, will you lose marks for not doing any of these, or will you get marks for each? Okay, so just again, trying to make sure we answer the right question. Maybe we need to clarify this one, but this could be about the third-party validation that we get done, or I think it may be more likely about the review of reporting, which is part of the, I think it's RP1 indicator. I've just had a further update to that. Yeah, review of reporting. Okay, so let's answer that from the point of view of review of reporting. Thanks for that. So again, the question is, so for everyone's clarity, with the need to have third-party review, will you lose marks for not doing any of those? There's 3 levels: check, check level, assurance, or verification. Aurelian, do you want to have a first stab at that?
Yeah, sure. So as Rick mentioned, we have an indicator that specifically tailors to third-party verification, and that's under RP1. And this validation is in relation, for instance, to the data you provide in your sustainability reports, your annual reports, or your integrated reports. Now, this indicator, if you have a sustainability report and you disclose it, and if it's third-party, it undergoes third-party verification, then obviously you will get more points for this specific indicator. There are other indicators that also encourage certain third-party, and that's notably the performance component. And essentially, if your data is third-party reviewed, then we encourage you to disclose it. So this is something that was added this year in the performance component and performance indicators, but that is not validated this year at this point, as this is a new sort of feature. Then regarding, Rick, should I expand into the GPCI validation, third-party validation?
No, that wasn't the question, so I think we can leave it there. So just to again reinforce what Aurelian's just said, the third-party review of results or external review for RP1 indicator on reporting, you do need to get that review done to get those points. But if you're just reporting, you will still get marks for reporting. You don't need to have done both for a particular report to get points. Okay, so reporting by itself still stands to get some points, but you'll get additional points for having the review done. I hope that answers the question. Okay, coming back to the review period, we're calling it. So I just posted in the chat a link to the section on our website, which goes through the review period. So this is a new thing for 2020. The review period starts on the 1st of October, when your preliminary results will be made available to all participants and only participants. Then you're able, if you wish, to submit a review request to GRESB using a particular form. Then after that review period, and I'll go through the detail of that in a second, we finalize results and issue your final results on November the 1st, and those results to your investors as well. The review period itself, just going to that. So those preliminary results that we released to you won't include rankings or peer group comparisons. It'll just include your kind of raw scores. You can then file an official request for validation or scoring review. The requests need to be at the entry level, and the request for review is charged €4,000 fee, similar to the participation fee. We will review each case individually and communicate a path for resolution with you. If the request relates to inaccurate input data, i.e. it was an error made on the participant side, we will reopen the relevant assessment and allow you to correct it. If the request relates to inaccurate validation or scoring decisions by GRESB and our third-party validators, we will evaluate the request and communicate the final result to you. And in that case, we will reimburse the €4,000 fee. So the period for that is those first 2 weeks, the 1st to 15th of October, for making that review request. The next week, the third week, the 15th to 22nd of October, participants can correct any mistakes, and GRESB can correct any mistakes in scoring or validation. And in the last week, the 22nd to 29th of October, we'll solve any pending validation items and rerun the scoring, and then do the final testing, etc., before release. So have a look at that webpage. It's all there if you want some more detail, but certainly happy to answer any more questions. Okay, we've had another question coming in relation to entity and reporting characteristics. So this question is, if the entity is a renewable energy power plant construction and operating company that sells its generated electricity to national power companies, should we check greater than 100 to RC7 for the number of customers, even though they are indirect customers? That's a good question. I'll just again bring up the right page on the assessment. Just bear with me for 1 second. So this is in relation to RC7, which is the GRESB materiality assessment for everyone's benefit. And there is that question on the number of customers. What is the number of customers? And there's 3 options for this: greater than 100, 10 to 100, or less than 10. And in the terminology, excuse me, at the bottom. Okay, so it clarifies in the terminology that customers are people or organizations that purchase the services provided by the asset. This can include business, i.e. business-to-business customers, and retail customers. So if in the case here where you're generating electricity to other companies who then have the relationship with the ultimate final users, the retail customers, then you would need to consider your direct customers there, your presumably in this case the national power companies or whoever it is that's directly buying your energy, because this question relates to those customers. Hope that answers the question there. Okay, just seeing if anyone else has raised their hand or anything on this section. No. Okay. So if there's no more questions on the asset entity reporting characteristics, we'll move on to the next topic, which is the management component of the asset assessment. So bring out in any of your questions on that one. We have had a question in advance on this. Could you be so kind to explain what does it mean exactly, diminishing increase in score approach? Regarding the questions, there's 3 indicators they're particularly asking about. Stakeholder engagement program, SE1, supply chain engagement program, SE2, stakeholder grievance process, SE 3.1. And I think, Katie, are you able to field this one?
Yeah, sure. So can I just share my screen? Aurelian? Yeah. Sorry, took a second. Okay, if everything's all right, you should be able to see the screen. So what I've done here, I've pulled up the indicator SE1 as an example from the scoring document. So as you can see, we have this indicator here. There are two sets of elements underneath the main indicator question. One on elements of the stakeholder engagement program worth 3/5 of the score. That's this part. But using a diminishing increase in score approach. This means that rather than each element being linearly worth 1/7 of the score for that section, a curve is fitted such that the first option is worth more than 1/7. The next element selected is rewarded slightly less, and so on down to the 7th option, worth much less than 1/7. So the curve might look like something like this, so I'll show you that as well. There we go. So I hope this is visible for everyone. So you might see it like this. You will still need to select 7 options to get the full score for the section, but the first options are worth much more than the last. So if you selected, say, 3 options, you might get, say, 60% of the score for this section, which is worth 3/5. So 60% worth of 3/5. The same sort of approach goes for the other section on stakeholders and for the other 2 indicators. So I hope that's all clear. So I'll stop sharing now and give it back to Aurelian.
Thanks, Katie. That's great. Hopefully, again, that answered that question, which was online. We had another question in yesterday's session, which I'll answer. But certainly keep on bringing your questions forward on this section if you have any. This was regarding what's the rationale behind adding the indicator on sustainability commitments, LE2, this year. It's a new indicator. So just to explain that, I explained the review process before. We've certainly seen a trend in the industry for a growing number of organizations to make commitments to improve certain facets of ESG. These can range from carbon commitments about, say, setting a science-based target or something like that, through to broader ESG commitments, and then commitments to social and other matters. So we've certainly seen that. We already have this indicator in our fund assessment and in the real estate assessment. So we looked at those and borrowed the elements that were relevant to assets, because obviously some of the commitments are really specific to investors only. So we didn't include them in this indicator. So it's a fairly aligned indicator to the fund and real estate assessments, however, just tailored for the asset sort of company situation. That's the reason that we brought it in. It's a good opportunity to report on commitments that you've been making. Because it's the first year we've brought that in, we're not scoring it, but we're open to scoring it in future years. All right, haven't had any other questions come in as yet on this topic of the management component, so we'll keep moving on. The next section is the asset performance component. Happy to take any questions on this, bring them forward. We did have a question again yesterday, which I'm happy to answer for you guys. In the health and safety of community indicator, which is in the performance section, performance component, if a casualty occurred out of an incident that was not the road operator's fault, should that casualty or incident be reported? So it's a good question. In the health and safety for community, it's up to you to define what is kind of material from a geographic and ESG sense to your business. And then we encourage you to report on all of those matters that are material. So if, for example, it was a toll road is an easy example, and accidents are occurring on the toll road, you may not have caused those accidents. You may have limited ability to control accidents, but some, in which case those accidents do present an ESG risk to your business and to your investors. So we think it is worth reporting those in the health and safety community indicator, and that's the kind of thing it's there for. Similarly, it may be that pedestrians are walking through or around your site and they encounter hazards that relate to your business. Again, incidents relating to that could be reported under health and safety of community. So that's answered that one. Haven't got any other questions yet coming in on the performance component. Moving on then to the materiality-based scoring and the GRESB materiality assessment. Are there any questions anyone has on materiality-based scoring I'd like to bring up? Okay, we'll keep moving on then. We'll have a look now at the fund assessment then, and the entity and reporting characteristics for the fund. Any questions on this? Nothing coming forward on that yet. Oh, we've got one, great. Okay, so this is probably on materiality, which is fine. The question is if an item is not material, for example, biodiversity, and we don't have related reporting or a policy, will we lose marks? So good question. So just to break that apart a little bit, an item or an issue, ESG issue we call them, like biodiversity, firstly, to say it's not material, you need to complete the GRESB materiality assessment in the indicator RC7 that we talked about earlier. And if completing that assessment that confirms that it is not material for your entity, then it will not be scored wherever that ESG issue exists within the assessment. So that can be in a number of places. Firstly, biodiversity can exist in the indicators in the management component, like on policy and risk assessment and so on. So that topic of biodiversity won't be taken into account in scoring in those. And similarly, with the indicator on biodiversity in the performance component, it won't be worth any points. So whether you report on that or not will make no difference to your scoring. You can still choose to report on that if that's something you'd like to do and you think your investors would like to see. It's still there for reporting purposes, but it won't count in the score. And another change we made this year is that any issues in the GRESB materiality assessment which are classified as low relevance will also not be scored. So last year it was only if they were no relevance. Now if they're no relevance or low relevance, they won't be taken into account in the scoring. Only issues that are classed as medium relevance or high relevance will affect the scoring. And the reason for that is we wanted to make sure that we're really dealing with the most material issues and not sort of minor issues which are not so relevant to performance. Hope that answers that question. Certainly, I'm happy to continue to answer questions about the fund assessment, the performance component of the funds. We haven't had any questions in advance. All right, maybe I'll move on to validation of scoring. There was a question on validation of scoring that we had in advance. This one is, I'd like to ask you more details regarding evidence. In the 2019 reference guide, it was really easy to understand what evidence was mandatory, optional, or optional, not mandatory. In 2020 assessment, this person has some doubts about the performance component and wants to clarify. Specifically, the performance indicators like energy, greenhouse gas, etc. for long-term targets, are these optional? And similarly, are the 2019 targets optional? And also the indicators on employees, EM1 and EM2, and customers, CU1. Is evidence optional for these? So I'll hand that over to Katie to have a go at that one.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So we made the decision to remove the mandatory evidence from the quantitative indicators. And these are all the indicators from OI1, so output to customers, CU1, in the asset assessment. It is only requested and still optional if you have, for example, external review. So say, for instance, that you're reporting greenhouse gas emissions and you provide details of your assurance of your greenhouse gas emissions data. It is optional to provide evidence, but it will not be validated and it will not be scored. The reason for this is that we are focusing on the transparency of your performance and targets data rather than their actual the actual numerical value. So this is something we want to move to in the future, where we're moving towards scoring actual performance. So in the future, we may request evidence and it may be mandatory, but it isn't this year.
Thanks, Katie. Finally, the resilience module. Now in its third year, and next year the plan is that they'll be integrated into the assessment and be no longer an optional extra. Any questions on the resilience module for Eric? Okay, nothing coming in there. So we've kind of gone through topic by topic. We're really open to any other questions at all now, and there's still a bit of time left, so we're certainly happy to stay on as long as you like during this session to answer any further questions. So it really is up to you guys if you have some more questions you'd like to ask.
Just a reminder to everyone to use the Q&A button or the raise your hand button if you want to ask a question.
Okay, not getting any more questions there. I'll just give you another moment. Would hate to miss out on any questions, but if there are no more, that hopefully means you all really know what you're doing. Oh wait, there's one more coming in. Okay. Okay, this is on certifications in the performance component for assets. On certifications, there was a much larger drop-down list in the guide than I have offered to me. Is this due to the scoring of the materiality assessment? Just trying to make sure we answer that correctly. I'll get Katie to have a go at that one. Then I have offered to me. I'm not quite sure what the questioner means by that. So it's a much larger drop-down list in the guide. Oh, then I have offered to me in the portal, I guess, is the difference between the guide and the portal is perhaps what's being highlighted here. Katie, do you want to have a first crack at that? And then we can, while we have a look. Yeah, only the person has commented that they've only got 5 options in the portal as opposed to a whole bunch, I guess, in the reference guide. Katie, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like a good point. We'll have a look in that. Yeah, we'll have a look and see what's going on there.
Okay, we don't have an immediate answer for that one, so we'll come back to you on that one. We can see your name there, so we'll come back to you out of session on that, if that's all right. We had another question coming in the meantime. We're completely new to completing the GRESB assessment. What tips can you give on where to start? So, good question. We did some sessions last week, particularly focused on new participants, and had some good questions. So one thing you could do is have a listen to those Q&A sessions, which will be posted very soon from the recordings from last week. Also, of course, the training. So really the training is very focused on new participants like this person. Go and have a look at the training, go through the main training lessons, and that will really equip you. There are sessions on getting started. There are sessions on explaining the different assessments and what all the indicators mean. So that is definitely a good place to start. And if everything is in the reference guide, so that's kind of your Bible, you'll get all your information from that as well. But I guess the training is good in that it takes you through that step by step. Hopefully that helps you. And certainly if after all of that, you've still got things that are troubling you and you're struggling with, then please just contact us via our contact form. All right. If there's no more questions coming in. No? Okay. So we got a lot out of the session. Hope you're feeling even more comfortable to complete your GRESB assessments. Please be rest assured that we're here to help. If you have any questions or problems, please contact us and we'll help you out and make sure you can get there. And hopefully everyone stays healthy, and that'll wrap it all up, and bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.